You want the truth? Nobody in this room would believe you belong here. The man says it with a small, tight laugh, like he's doing you a favor by saying it quietly instead of loudly. He's holding a glass of wine that costs more than the shirt you're wearing, and he means the shirt as an insult, and he's not wrong that it's cheap. He's just wrong about what that means. You don't correct him. You never correct anyone anymore, not at these things. Because 11 years ago, you learned that the moment you correct a man like this, the entire room recalibrates, and recalibration is boring, and you have found that being underestimated is, without question, the most useful financial position a person can hold. So you just nod. You let him believe he's the richest man in the room. He is not. That would be you. He simply has no way of knowing it, and in about 4 minutes, that's going to become a problem entirely of his own making. His name is Dorian. You'll learn later. Though right now he hasn't bothered introducing himself. Because men like Dorian don't introduce themselves to men wearing a $40 sweater at a $50,000 a plate charity mixer you were invited to specifically. Personally, by the foundation's chair, who happens to owe her entire endowment's growth over the last 6 years, to a fund you quietly control a controlling stake in. Dorian doesn't know that. Dorian knows you arrived alone, in a modest sedan instead of anything with a driver, and that you've spent the last 20 minutes nursing a single club soda instead of working the room. And to Dorian, a man who has spent his entire adult life reading rooms exclusively for status signals, you read as nobody. A +1 who wandered too close to the good canapes. He's not being cruel exactly. He genuinely believes he's protecting the room's social order from a minor breach. And there's something almost sweet about how sincerely wrong he is. Here's the thing worth knowing before this story goes any further. And it's the actual reason it keeps happening to you, over and over, at event after event. There's a well-documented phenomenon researchers call invisible affluence, the finding, across multiple studies on actual millionaires and self-made wealth, that people significantly overestimate how obviously wealth displays itself, and significantly underestimate how many genuinely wealthy people deliberately or simply naturally don't perform it. One widely cited study on American millionaires found the overwhelming majority drive ordinary, unremarkable cars, not because they can't afford better, but because the correlation between visible spending and actual net worth is, statistically, far weaker than almost anyone assumes. You are, tonight, a walking data point in that exact study, and Dorian is about to become an extremely expensive lesson in it. You met your host, the foundation chair, Junia, 11 years ago, back when her fund was small and struggling, and you were the anonymous limited partner who wrote the check that kept it alive through a brutal first 18 months nobody else believed in. You've never wanted your name on anything. You told her that explicitly. Back then, sitting in a diner because that's where she was comfortable meeting, and she's honored it ever since, which is precisely why, tonight, in a room full of people who each spent a great deal of effort ensuring everyone knows exactly how much they're worth, you are the single most financially significant person present, and functionally invisible. The first real tension point arrives about 90 seconds after Dorian's comment, and it comes from an unexpected direction. A woman near the bar, sharp-eyed, clearly cataloging the room the way people do at events like this, notices Dorian's little performance, and decides, apparently for her own entertainment, to join in. Her name, you'll learn, is Petra, and she works in wealth management for exactly the kind of firm that spends enormous money trying to identify people, like the version of you Dorian thinks he's looking at. Except her actual job, ironically, is finding people like the version of you that you actually are, and she is, in this specific moment, catastrophically failing at it. "Are you with catering?" she asks, not unkindly, more curious than cruel. And you tell her honestly that you're a guest, and she smiles the particular smile of someone humoring an answer she doesn't quite believe, and moves on to a more interesting conversation with someone wearing a visibly expensive watch. You could end this in 4 words. You don't. Partly because you've genuinely stopped needing anyone's validation somewhere around your 3rd billion, and partly because you're now, admittedly, a little bit curious how far this specific evening is going to go before gravity reasserts itself. The second tension point is where it stops being merely amusing and starts being something closer to consequential. Dorian, warming to his own performance now that Petra's joined in, decides to make you part of a story he's telling a small cluster of people who've gathered near the dessert table. Something about the kind of guest list dilution that happens once these events get too popular. Thirdly, gesturing loosely in your direction without quite looking at you, the way people gesture at furniture. And this is the part where the evening's actual stakes reveal themselves, because standing 3 feet away, listening to every word, is a man named Baxter, who happens to run the investment committee for the exact endowment Dorian's own family foundation depends on for its annual disbursement. And Baxter, unlike everyone else in this specific cluster, actually recognizes you, because Baxter was in the room 4 years ago for a very quiet, very private conversation about restructuring a fund that Dorian's family foundation's entire operating budget now depends on. You watch Baxter's face do a very specific thing, a slow, dawning recognition, followed immediately by a flicker of genuine alarm on Dorian's behalf. The look of a man watching a car very slowly begin to slide toward a cliff it doesn't yet know is there. Here's a second fact worth knowing, because it's about to matter enormously to Dorian specifically, even though he doesn't know it yet. Family foundations, the kind Dorian's family runs, are legally required to distribute a minimum of roughly 5% of their assets annually to maintain their tax-exempt status. A genuinely obscure but real IRS requirement most people, including apparently Dorian, have never bothered learning the details of, despite it being the single mechanism keeping his family's entire philanthropic operation, and by extension, a meaningful chunk of his own lifestyle, functional. That 5% has to come from somewhere, and for the last 4 years it's been coming, in significant part, from returns generated by a fund you happen to control, managed by a firm whose board you sit on anonymously, through a holding structure with your name on absolutely nothing anyone at this party could Google. Baxter, to his enormous credit, doesn't say anything in the moment. He simply extracts himself from the cluster with the practiced smoothness of a man who has spent a career learning exactly when conversations are about to become career relevant, and makes his way toward you instead, and the way he greets you, genuinely, warmly, using your actual name, the one Dorian has been very deliberately not asking for, changes the temperature of the entire dessert table in about 4 seconds flat. Dorian notices. This is where the story's real turn happens, and it's worth sitting in the specific discomfort of it, because it's more interesting than pure vindication would be. You watch him do the math in real time. Baxter's warmth, the use of your actual name, the small, unmistakable deference in his posture, and you watch Dorian's face cycle through the exact 3-stage sequence you've come to recognize after 11 years of this happening at one event or another. Confusion, then a horrible dawning specificity as he tries to place exactly who you might be, then something close to real fear, because men like Dorian have spent their entire lives cultivating rooms exactly like this one, and the one thing that terrifies them more than being poor is being socially, publicly, irrecoverably wrong in front of people whose opinion determines their own standing. He doesn't apologize immediately. That's not how it works, in your experience. The apology, when it comes, almost never comes in the moment, because the moment is too raw, too exposing. Instead, he does something almost more revealing. He tries, badly, to fold you into the conversation as though he'd been including you all along, gesturing at you with sudden, overcorrected warmth, using the word actually 3 times in one sentence, in a way that suggests his brain is still catching up to what his mouth is doing. Here's what almost nobody expects about how this actually resolves, and it's the real point of the whole evening. You don't humiliate him back. It's genuinely tempting. You'd be lying if you said the thought doesn't cross your mind. The specific, satisfying sentence you could say right now that would end his evening entirely. But you've watched enough people do that particular move over the years to know exactly how it plays out. It feels extraordinary for about 90 seconds, and then it becomes the story everyone tells about you instead of about him, and you have spent 11 very deliberate years making sure you are never, ever the story. Instead, you do something that confuses everyone at the table considerably more than public humiliation would have. You ask Dorian, genuinely, about the Foundation's actual work, the youth literacy program it funds, the specific numbers, the thing that's presumably the actual point of tonight underneath all the wine and status performance, and you listen, actually listen to his answer, and it turns out, underneath the insufferable opening, Dorian genuinely cares about the literacy program in a way that has nothing to do with status at all. It's the first honest thing he's said all night, and it's the moment you decide the evening's real lesson isn't going to be about him. It's going to be about what you do with the next 10 minutes. Petra, watching this unfold from the bar, is the one who finally asks the question everyone at the table is too polite to ask directly. So who are you, actually? And you give her the same answer you've given at a dozen events like this one. Over a dozen years. A name, no title, no number attached to it. Delivered with enough calm specificity that anyone who wants to look it up later, quietly, on their own time, absolutely can, and most of them do, and most of them come back changed, slightly, in how they carry themselves the next time they see you, and you've decided, somewhere around year 6 of this exact pattern, that this delayed, private reckoning is actually more useful than any public correction could ever be. People remember the lesson they taught themselves far longer than the one you hand them. Junia finds you near the end of the evening, having heard, secondhand, some garbled version of what happened at the dessert table, and she asks if you want her to say something to Dorian. You tell her no, genuinely, and she looks at you for a long moment, the way she has for 11 years now. The specific look of someone who has personally benefited more from your quiet involvement than almost anyone alive, and still, after all this time, finds your restraint slightly baffling. You could buy his family's entire foundation and not notice it left your account, she says, not unkindly, just stating a fact you're both aware of. You tell her that's exactly why you don't. The version of tonight where you do that is a story about power. The version where Dorian goes home slightly humbled, having actually talked about the literacy program out loud for once, and having no idea how close he came to a much worse evening, is a story about something you've decided matters more. You leave before dessert is cleared, the way you always do, and Baxter walks you to your unremarkable sedan, which he now, of course, understands is a choice and not a limitation. Does this happen a lot? He asks, genuinely curious, and you tell him the honest number, which is, constantly, at almost every event you attend that isn't specifically finance adjacent. Because the moment you stop wearing your net worth, people stop being able to see it, and most of them have never once considered that the two things might not be the same. He asks if it bothers you. You think about it for longer than you expect to, the way you always do when a question actually lands somewhere true. It used to, you tell him. Now it's mostly just information. It tells me exactly who in a room decides what someone's worth, before they've asked a single real question about them. That turns out to be enormously useful to know, long before you ever need it to be. You drive home in the unremarkable sedan, past a valet stand full of cars worth more than most people's houses, and somewhere behind you, at a dessert table you'll never think about again, Dorian is telling a slightly different version of tonight's story than the one he was rehearsing an hour ago, and for the first time in longer than he'd probably admit, it's a version that isn't about himself at all. That club soda I was drinking all night? Genuinely just my go-to at these things, and I finally found the exact glassware I actually like using at home too. Linked below if you're curious. Has anyone ever completely misjudged you based on how you look or dress? Tell me the story in the comments. I want to hear the best one. Subscribe for the next episode, dropping Thursday, and trust me, this Dorian situation is mild compared to what's coming.